Hi everyone, this is Samantha Sapolsky and this is my video for Module 1. So after reading the text, the frameworks that were presented in the text kind of allowed for me to first gain a very thorough understanding of identity and social identity and how it's created and how we can use the frameworks to reflect on our own identity, which I had learned about as an undergrad, but I don't think I really understood exactly the thoroughness of identity theories. And so the frameworks, I think, really allowed for me personally to kind of get a better understanding of how they, are formed and how we can use theories such as the frameworks presented in our text this week to kind of reflect on our own. That being said, I think that when reading the chapters, especially in Jones and Abe's, about the MMDI model, I found myself thinking about the women who shared their stories and how my own story would kind of play out had I been someone interviewed to share my own story. And when I was reading them, I kind of thought about what they were saying about their identity and how they portrayed themselves or how they thought of themselves. And some of their, identities kind of struck me as things that I don't think I really would have thought about for myself. I participated in the activities at the end of the chapters, or the end of the sections, which asked you to write down your core and whether those attributes that define your core was something that you felt was meaningful. And my three attributes that I wrote down for my core were independent, good friend, and high morals. And after I finished that, I kind of looked at the list and was a little bit surprised, not by the three things that I listed, but by the next question, which asked me whether I thought that they were meaningful and how meaningful they were. And I think that's what struck me as most surprising, because those three things, after I wrote them down and looked at them, I realized just how important they are for me personally, looking at it and, seeing that those are the things that I feel represent me and, my identity at my core. And those are the things that, regardless of where I end up or who I'm around, those things don't change. And so I thought that was kind of surprising for me, because I didn't realize until now that how important those things were. And how, through my 4 years of undergrad and now in grad school, no matter what I've been through as an individual, those three things have always been at my core. And then I think that the frameworks allow for me personally, and I'm sure for the rest of you, to see our identities and relationships through the context in which they were formed. When I kind of looked at the three things that were in my core, I kind of realized that they're more my values and my personality, but they're things that I have formed over time through experiences, beliefs, and especially how I was raised. So I think that those three things played a huge factor in the three words or phrases that I chose as my core identity. And I think that the frameworks kind of allowed me to realize that, obviously our identity is always changing. As the text mentioned, it's fluid, but, those three things are the three things that for me are not changing. And although they may not have been my three core attributes, let's say 4 years ago, 5 years ago, they are now, because of experiences, what I've been through, and how I was raised and how my parents brought me up. I found to be really interesting on page 85, I apologize, I'm looking at my book, where it says, the more privilege and identity, for example, race, the less salient it was. And I thought that was particularly really interesting, because once I read that, I kind of realized that statement was 100% accurate for myself, and thinking about, my relationships, a lot of those are very accurate with that statement as well. When I looked at the social identities that I listed as part of the next activity, race was not even on that list for me. Whereas, the stories in the text, those were very salient things for them. For me, however, it wasn't. And, when I thought about it, I think a lot of it had to do with my life and where I grew up and where I was raised. And I never at one point was a minority. Even when I went to school in Cincinnati, it was definitely, more even than it was where I grew up in Northern Ohio, but it still wasn't anything close to where that really was a social identity that I identified with. So I thought that quote from the book was just kind of really eye-opening and really interesting to me because, again, that's not something I had listed on mine, yet every woman who was interviewed for the project, that they listed race as being something that, was on their list. For myself, that's not something I even thought about when making my list. I wrote down the first things that popped to my mind, and that was not one of them. So I thought that was very interesting. And I think, again, like the frameworks really allowed for me to realize some of those things, and realize how my identity has been formed, and then realize how my relationships with other people have been affected because of my identity, because of, what I view myself as, how I define myself. So that's kind of all I had for this module, and I look forward to listening to all of your responses.